In my last video, we got started on this topic, so today we're here to finish things off with part 2. We're going through every single NBA team, picking out the biggest issue they are facing heading into the new season, and while some teams are set up to perform much better than others, there isn't a single perfect squad out there, so everyone still has an issue that they need to address. Last video, we went through the teams in the Eastern Conference, which means that today we're going to be going through the teams in the Western Conference to finish things out. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I'd also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Going in alphabetical order, we'll start with the Dallas Mavericks, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their backcourt defense. The Mavericks are coming off of a run to the NBA Finals, and in a few ways have gotten even better this summer, but one of their biggest struggles last year was the fact that Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, as talented and skilled as they are subpar defenders. The Mavericks also just brought in Klay Thompson, who in his heyday was a lockdown defender, but post-injury the last few years has not been anywhere close to a lockdown guy, and those three are all going to be playing big minutes, which could put extra strain on the front court's defensive duties. Next is the Denver Nuggets, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their depth. The Nuggets were already a very thin team last season and just lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in free agency to make things worse. Their only major signing this summer was Russell Westbrook, who is nearing the end of his career, and outside of that, they're relying on the development of players like Christian Braun and Peyton Watson a lot, which is a risky gamble for a title contender. Next is the Golden State Warriors, and their biggest issue going into the new season is their lack of shot creation. Steph Curry is still playing at a very high level, but even he has been becoming less of a create everything for himself off the dribble kind of guy in recent years, and plays a lot off the ball, running around screens and cutting to find himself a good look at a shot. Outside of him, they have Andrew Wiggins coming off of his worst season as a pro, Jonathan Kuminga, who is more of a slasher than a creator right now, and a bunch of spot-up shooters, so the variety in terms of scoring may be a bit lacking. Next is the Houston Rockets, and their biggest issue going into the new season is figuring out how to make Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun work better together. Sengun and Green are without a doubt the Rockets' two best young players, but they're not necessarily locked into them being the pairing that they're going to build around moving forward, because they don't actually play all that well together as a pairing. When they share the court, the team has a negative net rating, but when Sengun was on the court without Jalen Green, they outscored opponents by 5 points per 100 possessions, so if they can't make it work together soon, they may end up getting split up. Next is the Los Angeles Clippers, and their biggest issue going into the new season is Kawhi Leonard's health. Kawhi has struggled with injuries a lot over the last few years, and right now he's still recovering from a knee procedure that he had done this summer. At Media Day, he said that he's going to be extra cautious about his health, which is a good thing of course, but after losing Paul George in free agency, the team needs him on the court as much as possible to even have a chance of making the playoffs. Next is the Los Angeles Lakers, and their biggest issue going into the new season is the fact that they're pretty much the same team as they were last year. The Lakers season was pretty disappointing last year, ending up in the play-in tournament before once again being eliminated by the Denver Nuggets in the playoffs, this time in the first round, and instead of trying to retool, they opted to run it back with virtually the same squad, so the same issues will likely prevail, and in a loaded Western Conference, it now feels as though they're falling behind. Next is the Memphis Grizzlies, and their biggest issue going into the new year is their floor spacing. The Grizzlies will be back healthy this season and are hoping to bounce back to being a playoff team, but their lineup lacks significant shooting talent outside of Desmond Bane, of course. Bane is an elite high-volume three-point shooter, but Ja Morant, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Zach Edey, which is their projected starting five, are all either below-average shooters or non-shooters at all, and that could condense the floor, making life harder for their offense to flow. Next is the Minnesota Timberwolves, and their biggest issue going into the new year is figuring out how to incorporate Julius Randle into what they do. Julius Randle is an all-star and an all-NBA level talent, but his skill set definitely takes some getting used to, especially now after trading him so late into the offseason. In New York, he consistently ranked near the top of the NBA in terms of percentage of points either scored or assisted on for his team, with a heavy usage rate, and in Minnesota, he's going to have to accept a second fiddle role next to Anthony Edwards. Next is the New Orleans Pelicans, and their biggest issue going into the new year is figuring out what to do with Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram was on the trade block all summer, but no deal even came close to happening, and with him only having 1 year left on his current contract, they're running out of time to figure out how to handle it. It seems like they're not interested in giving him a contract extension, but if they don't trade him, they're going to lose him for nothing in free agency, and the longer they wait to make a move, the lower his value gets. Next is the Oklahoma City Thunder, and their biggest issue is their lack of secondary creation. The Thunder are admittedly a very well-built squad, so finding a weakness to pinpoint was tough, but if you had to pick one, it's probably the fact that their playmaking options outside of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander aren't the best compared to other contenders. Jalen Williams is developing very well as a two-way wing talent, but isn't quite the high-volume shot creator yet that you want from a number 2, and the rest of their lineup is made up of role players that are reliant on SGA to set them up. Next is the Phoenix Suns, and their biggest issue is that they're still way too top-heavy. The Suns' money is so constrained by the contracts of their big three of Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal that they were unable to build a well-balanced team last season, and it hurt them in the playoffs, and this year they're going to be dealing with a lot of the same, as their bench production is likely going to once again rank near the bottom of the league. Next is the Portland Trailblazers, and their biggest issue is figuring out their guard rotation. The Trailblazers invested a lot into Scoot Henderson when they drafted him 3rd overall last year, but Anthony Simons is a 23-point-per-game scorer and a way better point guard at this point in time, and still pretty young, and Shaedon Sharpe is another lottery pick from 2022 who has dealt with injuries early in his career, but still has a ton of potential as well. It's going to be tough having to bench one of them without stunting their growth, but it's something that will need to be done. Next is the Sacramento Kings, and their biggest issue is their defense. The Kings have never been a great defensive unit, but last year they did at least show noticeable improvement on that end, despite their season ending without a playoff berth. This offseason, though, they chose to go back to being all in on the offensive side of the ball by signing DeMar DeRozan, but in the process have sacrificed even more defensively, so we'll have to see how it plays out. Next is the San Antonio Spurs, and their biggest issue going into the new year is their lack of shot creators. Victor Wembanyama is an elite talent who seems to get exponentially better every month, but is still so young and streaky as a scorer, and the rest of the roster has a lot of question marks in this regard. Chris Paul is on his last legs, and last year in Golden State he struggled mightily scoring the ball. Devin Vassell is admittedly a very promising young wing player in this regard, but still isn't scoring over 20 points per game. Keldon Johnson has been moved to the bench, and Harrison Barnes and Jeremy Sohan are not go-to scoring options either. And finally, the last team in the Western Conference is the Utah Jazz, and their biggest issue going into the new season is the fact that they still haven't figured out what path they want to take as a team. The Jazz are a team that is somewhat rebuilding, but they also just paid a max contract extension to 27-year-old Lauri Markkanen, with other veterans like Jordan Clarkson, John Collins, and Colin Sexton playing big roles as well, so eventually they're going to have to commit one way or the other. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what concerns you have with these teams going into the new year. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.